Welcome to this week's live. Well, more like this month's live. Today we're listening to Catch a Vibe by Karun. Last month I promised you guys a song, so yay, you're here! I will try and add you. Wait, you have to request. Yes, that's how this works. I have to remind myself every time I do this how this works. Karibu sana, Brian. I shall wait for the request. Oh, please try to do that again. I was trying to add you in. Oh, there you are. I thought that hadn't worked. I can't hear you quite okay. I wonder if you can hear me. Ah, that's interesting. I can see your lips move. But I can't hear you. Okay. So.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can much better.
Great.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm also doing well. Glad to be here.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Sana, thank you for honoring my request.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yay, I'm excited. I have to start by saying congratulations, Sana, for the Lorry. And you have to tell me that's how it's pronounced. For the Lorry Youth Committee participation.
Yeah, thank you. You pronounce it like it's an O with a U in it, so it's like Luri. It's one of those Dutch words, you know.
Wait, so
yeah, it's one of those Dutch words.
How am I supposed to pronounce it?
Loris.
How do you pronounce it?
I just say Loris because I'm in Kenya anyway, so no one is going to judge me.
Bora communication.
Yeah, exactly.
So, how are you feeling about that? Are you looking forward to that? How's that looking?
Yeah, we're supposed to start in 2 weeks' time. So it's supposed to be a 1 year long thing. So, and it sounds like it will be quite interesting because essentially you're sitting in a panel with 14 or 15 other young Africans, and you're supposed to see how the award ceremony goes, make decisions about it. So it's going to be an interesting journey, and also learn from some really talented seniors. Yeah.
That's really exciting. I looked it up after I saw it. After you posted it, I looked it up, and it looks like something really inspiring as well, because you get to work with peers, but then you also get to get some mentorship maybe from people who've had a little bit more experience. So all the best with that. I think it should be exciting, and maybe write about it, tweet about it, tell us about it, so we can learn.
Actually, will be doing that. Yeah. I'll document it and share it on my Twitter so that guys can get an idea of what is going on.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you what led us to this point. I was following a thread you were doing on Twitter for some time.
Yeah.
About plants and herbs and all that good stuff. And so as I read it, it kind of felt like, in a sense, conversations that I used to have with my grandma. Because you talk to people who understand the culture better than you do, and that's one of the best ways to learn about it. And sometimes it would be by watching her make a concoction when you get a homa, or when you have a tummy ache, and she'd have something for that as well. Ama when you feel like you have a headache, and she'll give you something to rub on your temples, and and it helped, right? But I think just because of the way our education system was set up, maybe we didn't get the best of that kind of trickle down of culture. So I'm always very excited to see people who are documenting it. And one of the conversations I've been wanting to have is how do we use our digital storytelling platforms to document these stories in a way that's helpful to us to learn, but also to those who come after us, because we're going to lose them otherwise, right? So that's one of the things. And then, so when I saw you do that, I was like, oh, this is perfect. And then as it turns out, you're also the first guy I'm having on one of these lives. You're also the first. How does it feel to be a minority for a change?
I don't know. It's a strange place to be. I haven't been here for a long time. It usually happens when I'm in majority white countries. But being in the majority gender side, it's strange.
We're always hearing about first women to do things, right? So I have to.
I'm the first man. Thank you for the honor.
It gives me immense pleasure. And then also the first conversation that I'm having that's non-business related, which for me is also really exciting, because I've been having conversations mostly with people who are setting up businesses, etc. But the diversity of the conversation, I think, is essential. So tell us something a little bit about yourself. It could be anything really. It could be maybe you love mangoes or something, and then maybe you can tell us a bit more about the. Do you? I knew this.
I do.
And then maybe you can tell us a little bit about your fascination, how you ended up documenting plants and herbs and stuff.
Okay. So for those who might not know me, I'm a creative in general. That's my calling per se. Specifically, what I do to get rent is I write copy. So copywriting is the act of writing advertisements. So that's what I do for a living. But I'm also, I've been a poet. I've done spoken word, I've acted, I've directed theatrical pieces, but a lot of that is in my past life. These days I'm mostly just writing copy, I guess because I've grown older and the time and the energy to do most other things has faded out. My fascination with herbs and plants, it's almost a similar story to yours, by the way. I think when you told me us to have this conversation, I went back in time and tried to remember where it all began. And I remember I was like 10 years old, or maybe younger, and I was up country. My up country is in Tharaka. So Tharaka is very dry and hot, or semi-dry and hot. And it has high malaria prevalence. So one time I got down very sick, like we had gone to visit my grandparents and I got very sick. And it was in the deep of the night, so there were no hospitals where I could go. So I remember my grandfather, who in my culture I am named after, decided to go to the bush and do what he knows best. So he came back with some roots, he put them in a pot, he boiled them, and then he gave me the drink, or the juice or the soup from the roots to drink. And that's the first encounter I had with I don't like calling it traditional medicine, because I feel like the moment you use the word traditional, it means it's being contrasted to modern, and the traditional has the connotation of it's in the past. So I don't like using the word tradition. I like using the word indigenous. So he gave me this indigenous herb. And that was the first time. And then 4 years ago, so my upcountry is my grandfather's place is in Tharaka, but my parents' place is in Meru, proper Meru, place called Nkobo. So Nkobo is that mix between urban and rural area. So it means that you can walk out of your house and there'll be internet inside your house and there'll be matatus passing outside your house. But if you walk 500 meters away, there's a jungle, So that's the kind of place where I call home. So like 4 years ago, I was going out on a stroll with the dogs, and I came upon this shrub and I picked it because it looked like a mint, because I have seen mint in Nairobi supermarkets, So I see this shrub and it looks like mint next to the river, and I pick it. It's not the typical mint I see in the supermarkets, but I take a bite and it's really, really minty, like proper minty. So I have this. It's a plant called platostoma. I came to realize it's called platostoma later in life. And I have this friend called Kanda. So I remember sending this picture to Khan, and I was like, I think I've discovered a mint. And of course, I think we've all grown up in these urban settings and in this modern setting, yeah, where you're told you don't eat what you don't buy, you know, like you literally never, no one ever expects you to go to the bush and pick anything and just start chewing on it. So when I told her that, first of all, she had that, are you sure it's edible? That was my first, my first judge. My second judge was my mom. So I went home, I had picked a few leaves, I put it in some hot water, and the smell was really overpowering. Like it was really strong mint. And she was like, where did you get that from? And I was like, I got it from the bush. And she was like, are you sure it's edible? And
sure it's safe?
Yeah, are you sure it's safe? Like that's how it now all began for me in my adult life. Because I was like, you know, I think we've been conditioned and cultured to, I think it's capitalism's fault, if you ask me, and of course modernity again. We've been conditioned to always buy everything. You know, if I want to get herbs, I have to go to the clinic. If I want to get fruits, I have to go to the market. We've been conditioned. If I want to get pizza, I must go and buy it from a pizza place. We've been conditioned to do that. We're not used to getting things for ourselves. And I guess that's where all the resistance of, are you sure this is safe? Are you sure it's edible? I think that's where it all came from. But, well, 4 years, 5 years down the line, here I am chewing pretty much any wild thing I find in the bush, and trying to see what it's all about.
Yeah, it's very interesting because when you first said you chewed on it, I was like, oh, can it just match, right? Because how do you know like it's safe to chew on? But then listening to you, when you go and say that it's also like a direct product of the kind of lives we've led and the conditioning we've had, I'm like, oh, ouch. Yeah, but that's true as well, right? Because you're not accustomed to just, you're conditioned to thinking, will this hurt me? Will this? Okay, so that's that's how it starts, and you try and so in your childhood, right? You talked about what happened when you were 10. So between when you were 10 and adulthood, sort of, was there like fascination? Because I remember like growing up, whenever we went to shags up country. So my shags is in Yatta. Somewhere called Meru. So anytime we'd be there, they'd be certain to plants, certain to fruits, but only those that I had seen, maybe my grandma or somebody else, right? I was never courageous enough to just try a random one. But I have some very good memories of, like herbs and plants that were wild to some extent, I suppose, trying them. So between like your granddad getting something that helped you and, discovering this again in adulthood, was there any experience there as well?
Yeah, when I was still younger, like 10 years, between 7 years and maybe 13 years, I used to go up country again, Taraka. Yeah. So my grandfather had a flock, a herd of goats. So I had this cousin who would stay there. So he would go and graze the goats with him. So because for them, they used to go and graze the goats the whole day, you had to find a way of getting through the day. You're not carrying lunch. They're not even lunch boxes to begin with. So if you go to the bush, because he had like a 60-acre bush, and you'd go like at 10 a.m. and come back like at 4 p.m. So if you go there, he'd like during the different months, he'd find some fruits and he'd be like, this one is edible, let's chew on it. And I remember that one time he actually took this tree and he stripped it of its bark, and he took out the white part of the bark, like the inside part, and he started chewing on it. And I was like, what does that help with? And it was like, you do this when you're grazing and you're thirsty, And I tried it, and the white sap was really like it like basically poured water in my mouth. That's how wet it was, And it again, I think all those things started contributing to my fascination with plants and weeds and herbs, because I would see them grazing the whole day, and throughout the day there would be like 5 different fruits and plants that they would be chewing on that I'd never heard of, like they are not published anywhere. No one tells you go eat that one. It's just natural to them. So it gets you to ask yourself, how many other plants might they be useful, and I don't know about it. I don't know if you watched this movie called The Gods Must Be Crazy. I think you probably all watched it when you were younger, yeah? That guy, I don't know his name. I don't know if you ever had the name, the Khoisan guy. There's one of the scenes, he just goes out to the desert and he goes for a long distance and he sees a particular plant in the whole expanse of the desert, and he basically uproots it, and it has like a white thing on it's white inside. So he pounds on it, and then he squeezes it, and he gets water to drink, And for me, when I look at nature, that's how I see that's the relationship we should have with nature. Like nature has basically given us everything we'd ever need. It's for us now to go out there and chew on some strange herbs and see the good that comes out of it. Fortunately, some guys have done some research. So since I got this interest and curiosity about plants, I've really found lots of the plants we ignore, especially the ones we call weeds. A lot of the plants we call weeds are usually very useful plants. And for anyone who's listening, I have a very useful app, which probably you have, and maybe you haven't used for this use before, the Google Lens. There's an app called Google Lens. So if you have Google Lens on your phone, if you point it towards a plant, it can tell you the uses of that plant, what you can do with it, the botanical name, all those things. So it's been my companion for the last 5 years, because unfortunately our ancestors didn't do lots of documenting these plants and herbs, but fortunately some people online somewhere have done it. And a lot of it is actually from the Southern African countries, I think, because they are more receptive towards their cultural ways. So they've done lots of documenting for that. But in East Africa, the only place I've seen is the National Museum. They have a small botanical garden there. But apart from that, really, I don't think we've done much to untap the resources we have, the natural plant resources we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for the tip. I didn't know personally. I didn't know that Google Lens could do that, and I feel like that's now going to be my new fascination with it, and just kind of learning a bit as you go. I find it interesting as well how you say that the documentation that our forefathers and our ancestors would have done, I think would have been by word of mouth, and maybe between our parents' generation, maybe the generation before that, there might have been some sort of disconnect, or maybe us and our parents, and then it's not maybe trickling down as it used to in forms of stories and stuff. And for me, that's why the kind of thing you're doing with that thread on Twitter is so important, because it more than informing, it also preserves in a way. And then it passes down this knowledge, and then people know, right? And then you can't then claim ignorance anymore, right? Because there's this wealth of knowledge. Another interesting thing that you just that you talked about just now is how you perceive nature, right? So I am one of those people who has gone hiking once, like a proper, not hiking, camping, like a proper camp. I love hiking. I have a very complicated relationship with camping. My friends took me camping 16, and it wasn't even that much of a hardcore camp. And then after that, it was in Ngong, it was cold. After that, I just remember telling them, please, let's respect each other and let's not do this again.
The end.
It's why, you know what I mean? The reason is because there's some comforts that when you're in such a place are taken away. And when I listen to you saying about how you view nature, it's almost like you trust it will provide. And so me, the thing I need to work on is that building that trust that nature will provide when I go like camping and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? So I find those two things very inspiring. Just listening to you. So why the thread? How did you get to a point of starting the thread? Why the thread?
So again, it's in my journeys of discovery. So my mom has her own her garden here, or a lawn. So on this lawn there was this plant growing, and so normally for me to know whether a plant is probably going to be edible or useful, I just pick the leaves and I smell them. And somehow when I smell the leaves, I can tell. So there was this plant which had grown and it was like almost a meter tall and a meter wide. It was basically a big plant.
Allow me to interrupt, please. So is there anything particular about the smell? Is there anything specific about the smell? Or is it like something that you cultivate over time?
You know how you know food is tasty? I don't even if I have the word for it. Like how you bite food and you're like, actually this food is tasty. It's the same when you smell the plant, you can be like, this smells like something I would like to eat. Or it smells like something that would invite me to eat it. So most of them are usually very aromatic, like they have some aroma to them. Some stronger than others, but there's usually an aromatic part to them. So there was this plant which had grown, and so it was a weed essentially because it was growing in the middle of the grass. So I plucked it up and plucked it off, and when I picked one of the leaves, I did my usual smelling. I was like, this smells like it would be edible. So I, of course, Google Lensed it, and I saw it's called the Mexican tea. Yeah. So actually, that's the first plant I posted on that thread. So I go to my mom because now from the 4 years ago when I was telling you my mom was resistant, a few years down the line, she's jumped over to my side. So these days I discover something and go and tell her, do you know this can do that? And she's like, oh, interesting. Maybe we should plant more of them. So I went and told her, so I found this plant, and from what I'm seeing online, it's people drink it as tea in Mexico, and it cures colds, it cures arthritis, it cures gonorrhea, it does all these things. Just like, oh, interesting. So I took some, I made some tea, and I was like, you know, this thing I'm doing right now, I'm sure not many people actually know about, you know. And we probably get this plant growing somewhere in our backyard, we just pick it and go and burn it. But maybe if someone knew this plant actually is helpful, they might pick it up and make some tea with it and make them feel better. So I decided to just start with that one post. And it was during the lockdown, but the president had already said like there might be the opening of Nairobi and your country, so the kids had to come back to school. So I was like, I have 1 week. And in this 1 week, I'm in Meru. I'm going to make sure, at least for each day, because I know all these different plants which have different uses, I'll post a plant. So that's what I did. I started with that Mexican tea plant. Then I went to my favorite playlist of plants. So there are 2 plants which I absolutely love. And I think one day I'll just start a herbarium and I'll be telling guys, come for this one for free. Then you can buy the others. One of them is the mint I mentioned. It's called Platostoma.
Yeah.
It's the mintiest mint I've ever had. Like, it's very minty. And the reason I love it, it tastes like, it just tastes nice. Like it even has its own sugariness, you know. So you can make tea with it. You can make juices. Especially if you make the minty pine, it just slaps, you know. It's just nice. The other plant is called a Warbagia. So the Warbagia it's actually a tree, like Warbagia, W-A-R, then B-U-R-G-I-A.
Thank you.
So the Warbagia grows into a tree. And the first time I got to know about it, I'd gone to buy some trees somewhere in a nursery for me to plant. And the guy who was selling the trees was like, you should try this plant. And I was like, why? I was like, because it cures colds. So that's what the guy told me. And I was like, okay. And so first of all, it cures colds, but also it tastes like chili. So if you're someone who likes to use chili, you can just pick that plant and use it instead of chili. Fortunately, it's medicinal. So on top of giving you the chilliness you like, it's also giving you other benefits on top. So that's why I also love that plant. And once it's grown into a tree, it looks really nice. It's a very brilliant looking tree. So those are my 2 favorite plants. What was the question again? I think I just went off into a tangent.
No, I mean, I like it.
Yeah.
For me, that's kind of the whole point of this conversation, because you speak from the heart and then, you know, many more things come out. You know, see, I've learned about your favorite plants. I've learned about why it's important to you as well to kind of share this information. Because like you're saying, sometimes you see stuff and you just, you know, pluck it and throw it and then spend a lot of money, for example, on supplements.
Yeah.
But then maybe some of the things you've thrown away would have come in handy as those kinds of supplements.
Yeah.
So how do you think
But speaking of supplements, I don't know if any of you guys are on Twitter, there's this guy called I don't know if it's doctor or professor, but one of them, Mohammed Abdile. He actually developed a concoction of different herbal plants that you can use to actually, he's an actual doctor, so he's like scientifically authorized. So he has this concoction of plants which people use to make, to cure COVID. So that might be an interesting read for anyone. And he's actually proven it severally, like it can cure COVID. So, I mean, people are crying that they don't have medicine, etc. But here you go. Someone just went to the bushes and brought you what you need.
Yeah.
Wow,
I'm definitely going to look that up, because there's been so much conversation about what can cure COVID and, you know, there's also a lot of skepticism and stuff. So that's exciting. I'm going to look that up. So my question is going to be, how do you think we're doing in terms of preserving these things? How do you think we're doing in terms of making sure that we don't lose this kind of knowledge? And what do you think could be done a bit better?
So the way I see it, we are in an in-between. And I don't know who there's someone I keep telling this. I don't know if it's my friend Borai or someone, but I keep telling them that we are that generation like us, millennials, especially us who are in our 20s and early 30s. who might be the last ones to see some things if we don't do anything about them. So, for example, people who had used these kinds of medicinal herbs and plants before are now growing old. They're like in their 90s, their 80s, their 70s maybe. So we have the opportunity to learn from them. A lot of the documentation that could have been done has not been done, especially in this region. Yeah. The only place I said I've seen where they have some sort of a gallery of plants where you can just go and learn is the Nairobi Museum. They have a botanical garden where, but the most unexpected plants. I went there and I was like, wait a minute. I don't know if you know this plant. It's called Euphoria. It grows in the very dry areas of Kenya. If you cut it up,
right?
Exactly, that one, yeah. And people used to say that if you put it in your eyes, you go blind. I don't know if you heard that story when you were young.
Yes,
yeah.
I heard that story, yes.
So apparently, if you have warts, if you have warts on your skin, all you need is that milky sap. You just pick it, you apply on your skin for like 7 days, and it disappears. So you realize that if we had documented from way back, lots of these plants that we actually cut down, that we dislike, that we despise, would actually have more value to us, because now you find the value in them because you've documented. So my daughter is being a daughter.
That's it. We like guests.
Yeah. So a lot of the plants we should have documented, we haven't documented. But if we start doing it now, I think we still have time to catch up and show more people the value in the plants that we've been ignoring, despising, and basically hating or disliking. And one thing before I forget, I think the most active way of getting people to forget their culture is by getting them to erase their natural wealth, especially plants and other natural wealth. Because today I look, when I travel from Nairobi and I'm going to Meru, lots of the plants you see on the road, or lots of the trees actually, they're the trees called mukema. I think you know mukema.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Mukema is a foreign tree. And that's just the most open representation of us losing something. It doesn't mean that before we didn't have trees growing in all these places. But mukema, eucalyptus, they came in and they took over. And you see, the moment you lose that, even like I have my kids, when they grow up, they might never know there were fig trees or there were mahogany trees, which were useful, So it begins there. They start seeing this tree. It's called mukema. It's a foreign tree. It doesn't have any uses to me. They see eucalyptus. It's a nice tree. It's only used for building houses. They see another tree. It's probably a cider or a pine tree. It's only useful for building houses. And so that's one big chunk of our traditional knowledge that we lose. And if you go and look back, like maybe our ancestors, how they used to fight in the forest and all that, the trees that used to grow back there, like, let's say Mount Kenya forest, like I've been to the forest. I was there last month, and I found this very wonderful fan, like a fan which probably would look very nice in your apartment. So I planted it somewhere and I hope it's going to grow. But the trees which grow there, like you look at them and you can see the value in them, even without knowing what they can do. You have that feeling, that sense of this tree is more useful than I can tell, So we should go back to picking from our indigenous trees or indigenous plants, because that's where all our wisdom will come from. If you appreciate those herbs, we'll also start appreciating our cultures. We'll appreciate our music. We'll appreciate our dance. And I have my lighting assistant here doing her thing. Yeah. That's okay. So I wanted to mention that before I forget it. Yeah.
I honestly feel like for me, I came in, you and I talked earlier in the day, and I told you that I was just coming with a very open mind, but I genuinely feel like I've learned and I've been challenged in the last like half an hour in ways that I had not anticipated would happen. So when I was listening to you talk about Euphoria, it's called Ndao in Kamba, and
we call it
when I was young, Bantu spirit. So when I was younger, anytime you'd go near it, my mom would freak out, right? Because you could easily put it in your eyes and then lose your eyesight, for example. So now to hear that it actually has value, and do you know how much people are paying out here to get their warts removed? It's you go to this spa,
ridiculous amount.
Lots of money. earning lots of money for that stuff.
Yeah.
So I also hear you when you say that it begins slowly with, when you're driving home and then you notice that the trees that you see most are not what's indigenous to us, because you'd expect that what you see most is what's indigenous to us. And I think one of it, to me, is a failure of our education system, and how most of us millennials, people now in our 20s and 30s, are, how we went to school and what we thought was important and what we were taught to value. And I think we have to be very deliberate in unlearning and relearning about, the actual things that are going to be beneficial to us.
Yeah.
So have you, and when I talk to you now, listening to you now, I also realize that you're actually a very reflective person, because you talk about your experiences going to the planting, and you have to tell us what happened. That turns out to. I also like that you don't necessarily think that you've completely failed, because I found that a lot of times people are just like, oh, we're doing horrible, right? So I find that to be very, inspiring. And I get the sense that a few like-minded people might be able to kind of catch, whatever we have and preserve it in ways that could be helpful. So if you had, let's say, 5 of your friends, right, who are willing and very open to, starting small, like replacing the house plants with something more local to us, and learning about, herbs, cooking without mint, cooking without chili. What would you say is kind of like the easiest way to start? And I think you've already given us one, which is using Google Lens.
Yeah.
So what do you think? How else? So for example, like me, I wanted to start turning my life slowly too. What other things would you tell me to try?
So personally, because I think probably most of us, people who are tuning in, are living in the kind of setup where I live as well, which is being in an apartment building, or basically being in an urban setting. So naturally, the natural environment is not exactly outside your doorstep, So one thing I've done, I have lots of pots in my house. And I usually, every time I go outside and I discover this is a useful plant, I try to find its means of propagation. So a lot of plants usually propagate in 3 ways. Either you pick it up with its roots intact, then you transplant it, or you cut the stem, especially for the woody plants, and you dip the stem into the soil and it grows, or you plant the seed. So you find the means of propagation and you propagate it within your space. So some plants will decide to have more space than others. So if it's a plant that needs more space, hopefully your landlady or landlord, if you're rented out or if you're living in your own space, fortunately you have the space, go and plant it outside. So plants like rosemary. So rosemary, you get the cutting, you put it in soil and it grows. So that you can plant outside. But then you have plants like mints. So for example, mint just grows. Mint, if mint wasn't any wiser, it would be a weed, because it just grows. So you just pick mint, put it in soil, it will just grow. So those you can plant in your house. But then find also the right conditions. Some plants will thrive on your balcony or outside. Other plants will thrive inside the house. So try to find the right conditions for your plant. And of course, use Google Lens every time. Every time you go for a Karura walk, if you're going up country, just if you see a plant and it looks interesting, just try to Google Lens it. Even if it's not a medicinal plant, you might learn something interesting. Like for example, the other day I learned there's that plant I posted. It's called the blue potterweed. It's very loved by the bees, and butterflies, because it's nectar. It's very rich, So you might just Google Lens a plant and you find some interesting information about it. And if you have lots of space, actually, if you have like your own space, like not rented out, grow the plants and then also keep bees. Like have a beehive somewhere, because as long as you have a beehive, your plant will keep on thriving. And of course, you're helping the environment and the world by having some bees around. So it wouldn't hurt if you also get the honey. So those would be my small pointers.
Sorry, I was just saying that you talked about butterflies, and then I was like, oh, when's the last time I saw a butterfly? So, but that's kind of the whole point. So you start to keep bees, and you kind of help the environment and yourself as well. Excuse me.
And also to add one more thing, I think one thing that our ancestors used to do a lot is value the environment, And when you are colonized, you are taught not to have that same value to the environment. Essentially, it's like you are told to, it's not all that important. Why do you bother, And I think that mentality or that notion, we see it to date. So, for example, if you go up country, because I go up country a lot, like every 2 weeks, you'll find that most people who actually do farming these days, they use a lot of chemicals to do their farming. There's a chemical for killing the herbs. For the weeds, herbicides for the weeds. There's pesticides for the pests. There's acaricides for the ticks and all these other plants, other animals. So you find that by using all these chemicals, what we are doing is actually, it's pretty much having an industry in your own farm, because you're basically producing one type of plant, But also it has an effect on us, because the moment you use all these pesticides, they end up in our in the system. So you harvest tomatoes, they can be sold in a market somewhere near you, and that's what you're eating. That's what you're having on your dinner plate. Yeah. But then I see someone like my grandmother, who's closer to 80. Yeah. She does her farming, but she never uses any chemicals at all. She'll plant her ndengu. She'll remove the weeds physically, like manually. She'll uproot them. If there are any herbs, she has some way to do it. Like, for example, but if anyone is a farmer here, if you have any pests in your farm, keep rabbits, then harvest the urine. So if you use the rabbit urine in spraying the farm, the pest will disappear. So instead of using what are they called, pesticides from those companies, there's this company which is very notorious, Bayer. Yeah, instead of using pesticides from Bayer, just use rabbit urine, and it will be it's natural, it's organic, and it's good for you. So the point I was making was, the moment you start to value plants like that, you also start valuing yourself, and you start thinking about the whole value chain of what comes to your mouth and what leaves your hands as well, Everything you do starts being in that holistic nature, like you view everything from a holistic standpoint. Even deciding to walk instead of driving, for example, if it's a short distance, it changes how you think. Deciding to eat traditional managu because they grow naturally without having to use pesticides and herbicides, as opposed to sukuma wiki, which has to be sprayed a lot so that they can adapt to the conditions, makes a difference. So appreciating the natural resources that we have, especially the plants we have, gives you an appreciation for everything else in your life. Yeah. And that's what I see with my grandmother, because for her, she leads a very simple life. Yeah. A very simple life, but she's grown to this long life of happiness and health because of how she appreciates everything else around her. So I think if we started living that holistically with nature, instead of looking at ourselves like a fringe part of the world, like we are the lords of the world, and the world needs to listen to us, and we need to command the world. At the end of the day, we'll all suffer. Like, maybe not this generation, maybe not the next generation, but generations down the line, we'll feel something has gone on, and it's not the right thing. Yeah.
Gosh, that's so profound. But I absolutely 100% agree that we sometimes tend to look at things as if they're isolated, but in real sense, all these things are kind of interconnected, and our attitude towards some of these things then reflect our attitude towards other aspects of our lives.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. On a personal level, you've left me with a lot to think about. And just learn, and I kind of have a fascination for the weekend to look into and educate myself. And for me, that's what conversations are about, right? Hearing things that maybe might be a blind spot to you, or like you haven't really considered, and just having conversations with great thinkers like yourself. I realized that actually, I think this is like our first long conversation, and my mind is blown, and I'm just like, why haven't I done this sooner? So thank you so very much.
I don't know if you know this, by the way. Sorry to interrupt you. I don't know if you know this, but you have a friend called Melody. You know Melody?
Yes, I know Melody.
So Melody,
I know that she and Melody are,
Yeah. So like, is it 5-6 years ago? Basically, when you were flying out, when you were living to the UK for the first time, she was like, I have this friend called Betty Kiyoko, and I think you guys would click, like mentally, Yeah. So I saw on the chat today, and I remember when she mentioned that many years back. Yeah. And now I can see why anyway.
Oh, yes, me too. Absolutely. That's what I was going to say. And my gut tells me that this is not the last time that you and I have this conversation, whether in public spaces or in other capacities, that we're totally going to pick this up. Because I think it's something maybe we could do. We could make a little contribution to this preservation, and I think it's really, really can't be understated. Thank you very much, Brian. You are amazing, and I wish you a lot of blessings and good fortune in everything that you do. I wish your little light sisters a lot of happiness in her childhood. Brilliance and blossoming, because those are some of the best days of her life. And I'm going to now say thank you to everybody who's been hanging out with us for the last 14 minutes, give or take. And wish you all a very, very great weekend. And take it to try and weekend, and come share it with us on our page or on Brian's thread. And we all just keep learning together, because that's kind of the whole point. So
thank you. Thank you so much, Betty, for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I'll make a point to keep on sharing this. So when I open a page, I'll let you know so that you can let the guys know. I'll open a dedicated page for this. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
I can see my fellow herbalist, Coco Tripper there. Have a good weekend, Betty. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.